Here at Skelly's Garage, I have a phrase that unfortunately I've had to use a number of times. And that phrase is, there has been a complication. Motor oil, oh motor oil, I know that I have motor oil.
Yes!
Welcome back, friends. Ow. Ow. Welcome back, friends. This is my M54B30 that I have been rebuilding in order to put it into that, which I don't think you can see. You can't see. Over the last couple of weeks, we've done a lot of tests, we've done a lot of measuring, we've done a lot of validation to make sure that this engine is good, and by and large, it has passed with flying colors. So what that means is it's time to put it back together. But there are a few tiny little complications. The first of which is I put this crankshaft in wrong, so we're gonna fix that right now. There. Now I removed all the bolts. Let's actually do the thing that we came here to do. Right, that's the bearings off. Now I need some oil. Motor oil, oh motor oil, I know that I have motor oil. For our motor oil, we'll be using Liquid Moly 5W40. It's good. All right, I'm gonna take the crankshaft out, I'm gonna put it over there. We're gonna oil the bearings. Then I'm gonna put the crankshaft back, we're gonna oil the journals, and then we're gonna put the other bearings back, and then we're gonna center the crankshaft, and it's a lot of work. I ripped my glove. Why didn't anybody tell me? We take our little oiling dingus, apply a film of oil. Are you in? So, apply a little bit of oil to the bearing, a little bit of oil to the crankshaft, and don't delay. Our new main bearing cap bolts. Just gonna oil the crankshaft. Before we continue, these reinforcement plates have to go back in, and they go on the right. Right? No. No, these bolts go on the side that is closer to the front of the engine. Now that the reinforcement plates and the main bolt cap screws are in, let's tighten some of them down. Now before I get to centering the crankshaft and all of the other things I forgot to do last time, I need to set joining torque for each one of these main bearing cap bolts. It is 20 Newton meters. Now that we have joining torque applied on all of these bolts, we need to loosen the cap for number 6. This next part is going to look insane, but trust me. So this is the thrust bearing. You can see the edges of it peeking out from under the cap. Our task is to make sure that it's centered. As you can see right now, the right side is a little bit more out than the left side. Obviously, we can't just hit this with a hammer. However, we can hit this with a hammer and some wood. So let's do that. There we go. That's a lot better. Excellent. Job done. BMW recommends that you use a plastic hammer, but BMW recommends a lot of things. I think this is good. It's centered in the thrust bearing now, so let's continue. Right, so all of these bolts now have the joining torque applied. Now we need to turn them all through 70 degrees. Now we're back to where we started. But this time, it's done correctly. All right, so now that we've done the main bearings, it's time to do the rod bearings. The rod bearings, if you've forgotten, are the bearings that go between the connecting rod and the connecting rod cap that go over the crankshaft. For this engine, I have chosen a set of Schmidt rod bearings. The box is a little damp. They are right here, on my handy-dandy, versatile, multi-use piece of wood. The process for measuring rod bearings is basically the same as it is for measuring main bearings, except that it's a little bit more painful because I can't measure all of them at once. I have to do it one by one. So we're going to do that. In this bag are the components for piston number 1. piston number 1 is the one we're going to test first. Not actually because it's number 1, but because it's the one that happens to be bottom dead center already and I don't have to do any additional work. I'm going to temporarily install the connecting rod back into the piston head. Like so. So, the piston. You can't see this right now, so I'm going to make it so you can. You see, there's an arrow there. It points to the front of the engine. The front of the engine, of course, is signified by cylinder number 1. So that means, for this piston to go in, the arrow has to be facing this way. But since we're going to be putting it in upside down, it's actually going to be in this orientation. So let's take the rings off. Ring number 1 removed. Ring number 2. And ring number 3. The reason that I did that is because without a ring compressor, it's very hard to push the piston. It's not possible, really, to push the piston into this combustion chamber. And I don't care about that right now. What I care about is whether these rod bearings that I have are going to be the right ones. Because if not, I have to order new ones. So I took the piston rings off because I need the piston to slide in and out of the combustion chamber easily. I have new rings. They're in that box. Actually, that box. But that's not relevant because you can't see either. Anyway, let's do this. I'm going to attach the rod bearing to the connecting rod. You put the tang into the place for the tang. It's very, very obvious. I'm going to just clean off the journal here. Make sure the bearing is dry. Take our rod cap. Pop the bearing shell in there. Make sure it's clean. And we have our old connecting rod bolts. Let's do this thing. Arrow pointing correctly. That's on. Make sure that the tangs on the connecting rod cap line up with, well, they're on the same side as the connecting rod itself. Tape a couple bolts, drive it in place. I forgot the plastic gauge. Oh my God, you need 4 hands to do this the way that I'm planning. I forgot the plastic gauge. I have to do that again. Okay, we have our plastic gauge installed on the bearing journal. Now I'm going to take the piston, install it into the engine. Take the bearing cap. Very good! Now we have plastic gauge in there. Now let's tighten this down, do the full torque sequence, and then we'll check it out. I thought the camera was recording. So anyway, I found my socket. It's 5 Newton meters, 20 Newton meters, and then 70 degrees. Now, however, it's time to take it off. Using the measuring dingus, let's have a look. Once again, the approach is exactly the same. It is wider than 0.76 millimeters. It is wider than 0.51 millimeters, but it is not as wide as 0.38 millimeters. Now I just have to do this 5 more times. Let's clean off the bearing journal here. Now that that's all clean, let me tell you the good news. The good news is that the specified rod bearing clearance on the M54B30 engine is between 0.2 and 0.55 millimeters, which means that for piston number 1, the connecting rod bearing clearance is well within specification. And obviously I'm going to check the rest of them as well, but I'm just going to do that tomorrow because I'm tired. Bye! Here at Skelly's Garage, I have a phrase that unfortunately I've had to use a number of times. And that phrase is, there has been a complication. It all started earlier this week when I realized that I forgot something when I was removing the valve train from this engine. Let me demonstrate. This is an exhaust valve for an M54B30. When I took it out of the engine, I showed you that there is the exhaust valve, I showed you a valve spring, and I showed you a plate that goes over the valve spring like so. There are also some keepers there. What I forgot about was that under all of this is one of these. This little guy is what the valve spring sits on when it is inside of the head. I forgot to remove these, which normally would be fine, except as you know, I was doing cleaning of the head. I noticed that these were still in there, so I took all of them out, and all of them, in this case, turned out to be 23. This engine has 24 valves. So you lost one of the valve spring pockets. What's the big deal? I mean, surely you could just buy one, right? Well, yes, I did. It's just a part that's not really on dealers' shelves because they don't typically do rebuilds on 20-year-old BMW engines, and unfortunately 2006-ish is when they stopped using those spring pockets and went to something different. So I'm waiting for that. Also, let me show you another part. This unassuming little thing is called the valve stem seal. It sits on top of the valve guide so that the valves can go in and out, but oil cannot escape downwards through the valve guide into the combustion chamber. If these go bad, you're going to start burning oil. If you've ever seen a 2010-ish BMW X5 with a V8 and it's blowing a lot of smoke, this is why. Valve stem seals on that engine tend to go bad, and so I figured, I'm already in here, I have the parts, they're very cheap, I might as well replace them. The problem is, when I removed one of the valve stem seals, I grabbed it a little bit too far down. And I managed with my incredible grip strength to bend one of the valve guides. Yes, the valve guide. One of 24 that I so thoroughly checked in the last episode to make sure that they were all okay. One of them is now bent. That sucks, that's really annoying. So I had to order another valve guide, and BMW doesn't sell them, so I had to look for the aftermarket because there are people who still replace them and still sell high quality valve guides. So I ordered one, it came from California actually really quickly, but obviously it's not something that I can do myself. However, there is a silver lining. Remember the machinist that I took this engine block to? It turned out that he has an opening. Not only is he going to replace the valve guide, he's also going to hot tank the head so that when it comes back, it's going to be sparkling clean and be absolutely in phenomenal shape. Now what I've done here so far, and the reason for all of these paper towels, is because I have started the process of degreasing this block on my own. I could of course take it to the same machinist who's doing my head to dip the block as well, but actually it's going to be almost 3 times the cost to do the block than it would do to the head. And since the block doesn't really have as many intricate small channels as the head does, I'm just going to do it myself. The good news is that we're already making some progress. I mean, look at this. You can see it. It's meant to be an alloy steel block. It's not all black anymore.
And so I continued the process of applying degreaser, brake cleaner, and mechanical agitation through my drill-powered brush until I was satisfied that the engine looked, well, cleaner. Anyway, it's time to get back to our piston-related activities.
So today is actually colder than it was yesterday, but I have a sweatshirt this time, so I feel a lot better. This is an angle that you've probably never seen before, and that's because I am running out of surfaces to put things on. I've got my valve train over there, I've got other parts on the workbench there, so we're gonna do this here. And what exactly are we gonna do, you might be asking? Well, I'm about to tell you. I'm gonna take all 6 pistons and I'm gonna clear them of the piston ring so that it makes it easier for me to check the rod bearing clearances. Then we're gonna check the rod bearing clearances. And after that is where these come in. These are Malle piston rings. They're good. Piston Nummer 2. We need to clean this piston and put it back together and then remove the piston rings. Honestly, these aren't really that bad. I am not looking for perfection. What I am looking for, however, is this arrow, which you undoubtedly can't see. That arrow tells us which orientation the piston head must be in when it goes into the engine. Now let's remove the piston rings. Each one of these pistons has 3 rings. 2 compression rings and an oil control ring. None of these rings are particularly difficult to remove, honestly. Take the wrist pin, put it back in. Now that the wrist pin is back in, we're going to put in the clip. That's ready for use. Now watch this marvel of movie magic. I hope that transition was smooth. But look! 6 pistons, all ready to go. Place the plastic gauge onto the journal. Piston coming in. Ensuring, of course, that it's facing the right direction. Put the bearing cap on. Make sure that it's aligned. Put them in. Now let's take it off and see how we did. Okay. And the measuring dingus says that is most definitely a pass. Let's clean this off. Let's test number 3. Very good. Good. All of them are good. But that took a while.
Sure as hell did. And while the rod bearings all tested out to be perfectly within specification, I realized, and you probably did too, that I performed this whole test extremely inefficiently. I should have just assembled the pistons permanently, put rings on them, and then after testing the rod bearings to make sure that they're okay, oiled them and installed them completely. But I didn't do that. Anyway, now it was time to do literally the last check on my agenda. The piston rings and their gaps.
Oh my god, it's cold. You can see that, right? We need to check the gap of these piston rings. And what that means is, when these piston rings are inside the cylinder bore, how much space do they have between the ends? Again, comes out the feeler gauge. So, I have 6 of these rings, 6 of another type of ring, and 6 of a third type entirely because the piston has 3 rings. Now, as I explained in a previous episode, as an engine wears, it begins to form sort of a taper. And for that reason, you can't measure the piston ring gap at the top of the cylinder. It has to be pretty close to the bottom. So that's what we're going to do. Let's pick a random cylinder. How about cylinder number 1? I'm going to show you what that looks like. Here are our feeler gauges. That one is 0.4 millimeters. This one is 0.2. We need to make sure that we can get at least this one. And that goes in just fine. And this one doesn't even want to go in. So it's definitely between 0.2 and 0.4 millimeters. Now the third ring is actually made up of 2 different rings because the third ring is an oil control ring. It has this steel sort of mesh bit, but also has this rigid bit. So yeah, I'm just going to take the spring bit out, and then I'm going to get this in, and we're going to check the clearance on that as well. So we line it up at the top, then we use the piston to push it down. The clearance on the oil control ring is slightly higher on the top side. It's 0.2 to 0.45. 0.2 passes through. 0.4 still doesn't pass through. So this is probably closer to the tighter end of the tolerance, which is perfectly fine. So that's good news. I guess these piston rings are the right ones. Now, yeah, of course, the part number on the piston rings box says it's the right one, but I mean, are you surprised that I'm checking? I'm satisfied. Let's ring these pistons because I want to put this engine together. The third one, the 2-part oil control ring, it actually kind of slides open, and then you close it into the groove. Then we get our ring tool, line it up. And there we go. Just make sure you have the oil control ring completely covered. The other 2 rings, they're called compression rings. They actually do have a marking on them that says top. It means that that part faces upwards. Okay, it was actually easier without the tool. The same story with this one. It's also a compression ring, and this also has a marking to indicate which side is up. Okay, so important note before we continue. If you have the gap on the top ring, say at 12 o'clock, the gap on the second ring should be at 6 o'clock. And then the third ring, the oil compression ring, should be in the middle between those 2. So either at 9 or 3 o'clock. And that is how you gap piston rings and install them on the piston. My hands are cold. Oh my god. Okay. Now let's do this 5 more times. I bought this tool also a couple of months ago, and I have no idea whether it's going to work. This is what's called a piston ring compressor. If you're wondering, does it compress piston rings? You're goddamn right it does. We once again need some broken furniture, because we're going to build a platform for our piston. I'm just going to double check that the clocking on the rings is correct, and then we'll put this around it. Now what this does is it's going to let me push this into the cylinder, hopefully without too much of a problem. We make sure that the piston is pointed the right way using the arrow. Then we compress, and then we should be able to tap it in place. Nice! Gross! Okay, so pistons 6 and 1 are both in, and the reason I just did those two is because, as you can see here, the position for those two pistons at the moment is basically bottom dead center. So when I whack the piston into the cylinder, it has no chance of scratching the crankshaft. Let's put on the connecting rods for those two pistons, and then we can continue with the other 4. Just a little bit of oil. That should go on the journal and on the bearing. Okay, now we can bring the piston up, put the bearing on for real. Here are our brand new bolts from BMW. I'm going to only apply joining torque for these at the moment because I want to torque them all to spec when they're all ready. There are 2 joining torques for the connecting rod bolts. First, you must torque the bolts to 5 Newton meters. Let's do that. I did slightly cheat, and I'll tell you if you promise not to get angry. I do not have a 1/4 inch E12 socket. However, I do have a 1/4 inch 10 millimeter socket. 10 millimeter fits over E12 just fine. If we're only applying 5 Newton meters of force, that is perfectly acceptable. If I was doing anything more than that, I wouldn't do it. I'm just going to do 1 dot to indicate first pass. Let's move the crankshaft. Now 5 and 2 are at bottom dead center.
And then it was a simple case of rinse and repeat until all of the pistons were in the engine and all of the connecting rods had their initial joining torque set.
So, once I torque this up, this bottom end will have been, legally, rebuilt. We replaced the piston rings, we replaced the rod bearings, we replaced the main bearings, we made sure that the block was in perfect shape. And so, that's fantastic. But there are also some other complications, which is why I decided that we're going to stop here. Next week, I have to take the engine out of that. The reason that I have to take the engine out of that before I finish building this is because there are parts of that engine that I need to put onto this one. The oil pump, the oil pan, the flywheel, some of the random accessory bolts here. I need all of those before I can fully put this engine together and time it. I can't time this engine unless it has a flywheel. It's just not possible. I mean, it's probably, possible, but I'm not gonna do it. It's a pain in the ass. I don't know why I would make myself suffer like that. I have the whole week off from work, which is a fantastic thing. And since it's going to be warmer next week, that's right, in the dead of winter, it will be warmer because the earth is on fire. I won't have to suffer as much, and maybe I won't have to sit 6 inches away from a kerosene heater just to feel my hands. So I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, that's it. We have a rebuild bottom end. I'm very happy with that. The top end, well, we'll get to that once this engine is out, and honestly, it's a lot simpler anyway. There have been so many firsts for me in this project. I've never, rebuilt an engine that, I hope that will one day run again. I mean, when I was in high school and I was in auto shop, we had a dismantled Chevy small block engine that, we played with, but nobody ever expected that engine to operate again. I mean, it was just there to be taken apart and put back together badly by a bunch of 16-year-olds. And for which purpose it actually did very well. I will say just one thing, I learned virtually nothing from auto shop because I was not a very good student. But, I've come around. I did the same thing with music, but now I've come around with auto mechanics as well. That was a hell of a digression. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching. I really appreciate that you're here. I'm very excited to get this engine into that car. I also have to thank my Patreon subscribers, these fine folks over here. There's a free option on Patreon. You can just, look at stuff there and we can, and chat with me if you want. I'm not pressuring you to do it, but, if you want to do it, it's free. You can also check out the Instagram right here. And if you like this video, make sure to like it. On YouTube. It helps. Anyway, my name is Sam. That's the Grey Lady. This is a fully rebuilt bottom end of an M54B30. And this is Skelly's Garage. We'll see you next week.